Barigalust! Welcome to the AWWA Armenian Voices, where Armenian stories live, breathe, and are passed on. In each episode, you'll hear real Armenian voices sharing personal stories about culture, family, and identity. Stories that help us stay connected to who we are and where we come from. This week's stories are all about the power of love. We hope you enjoy this episode, brought to you by the Armenian Women's Welfare Association, AWWA, where our mission since 1915 has been to honor, uplift, and care for our elders, advocate for their voices, and honor Armenian heritage.
Hi, my name is Margarita Simonyan, and I am from Los Angeles, California, and I'm here to talk a little bit about my Armenian heritage, its culture, and what that means to me. And I want to thank the Armenian Women's Welfare Association for allowing me this opportunity to share a little bit about growing up as an Armenian. I think growing up as an Armenian American, although I always love to just introduce myself as an Armenian, it's really felt like living in two overlapping worlds, where I had the smell of my mom's dishes sort of filling up the kitchen, the sound of my dad blasting Armenian news on the TV at 10 in the morning, but then also growing up with that weight of a history that we've carried with both pride and pain. Personally, for me, growing up outside of Armenia, I've always felt very divided between two different worlds. I've always felt sort of like a stranger in the U.S. and have always longed for a land, this place that I've been connected to, and that I've always felt this strong connection to, and visiting every year, even sometimes as, a tourist, I think has filled me with this sort of sense of guilt. But I think that is what has allowed me to be twice as Armenian in everything that I do in all of my daily lives. I think this over portrayal of my Armenian identity is something that I've dealt with for as young as I can remember. At school or out in public, I often had to sort of explain where Armenia was, not Romania, but Armenia. I had to point it out on a map. I had to pull out my phone, anything I had to do to talk a little bit about where I'm from and to let people know what Armenia was. I think that made me very hyper aware of identity and history at a very young age, something that not a lot of other people faced or dealt with. We had these small, very tight-knit communities, and I'm so thankful to be in LA of all places because we had such a strong Armenian community there. I grew up at the age of 5 going to Armenian dance, and although I didn't go to an Armenian school, I was still very connected to my Armenian community. Just about 5 years ago, I took on reading and learning the Armenian language, and recently passed the California State of Education language test in Armenian. And I think just being surrounded by this great Armenian community and having parents, I think, both who were born and raised in Armenia, constantly pushing the Armenian narrative, the Armenian story, and where you're from, and to be very sort of aware of your identity, but not just be aware, but see that as a responsibility, was a huge part in my growing up and sort of what I do now and how I lead my life. When I look back at my culture and my people, I think one thing that I really love about our heritage has been our resilience. I love that we dance to mourn and sing to survive. I think there's so much beauty in how much we've been through, and I don't know any other group, any other culture, any other nation that's seen just as much as the Armenian people have seen, and they continue to dance and they continue to sing and smile and celebrate our culture and where we're from. And it brings tears to my eyes because not many people can do that. And I think that resilience in my people has manifested into it in me and how I lead my life. I love how we always find some way to turn grief into strength and exile and death into poetry. Our food, our language, our music, I feel everything is stitched together with memory and love. And I love that after all that we've seen and after all that we've dealt with, we've stayed intact even after being scattered across the globe. In Russia, America, Lebanon. I truly find it so beautiful that we've still kept that little piece of where we're from and that identity, and that we continue to lead our lives with resilience. I think that that's a trait that you'll find in any Armenian that you meet, and it's not only kept us a country and kept us unified, but also I think it's helped us lead our daily lives, whether that's at work, at school, or in any journeys that we sort of come upon. I think we always lead with resilience, and I find that really beautiful. But with resilience, I think there comes sort of the opposite side of that, the misunderstood side. Something that I wish more people understood about Armenian culture is that we're more than just a tragedy. Growing up, from the age that I could walk, I remember protesting at the yearly 1915 sort of remembrance march in LA, hosted by the Unified Young Armenians organization. Every year we'd come together, we'd chant, we'd sit in this sort of sorrow and tragedy, and a lot of the times when you meet someone who's non-Armenian or when they learn about you, it sort of all becomes about tragedy and suffering and vulnerability. And I wish more people would understand that we're truly not just a tragedy. I think from the outside it can seem that way, but from the inside, I think Armenian culture is so much more than genocide and survival. I think it's art. It's our hospitality, both in Armenia and in the diaspora. It's our literature, our poems by Tumanyan and Sahyan, our music by Komitas. Everything is a testament that we're not just tragedy, and there's so much love and memory that can come out of the trauma that our people have seen. I think our identity isn't just about what we lost, but what we've preserved and what we continue to keep creating. It's sort of beautiful because we're both ancient and modern. We're both sort of spiritual, but also revolutionary. I think in ways our country can come off as quiet, but in reality, we're very fierce. And I wish more people can see that, and I wish more people can understand that. Kind of going back to growing up as an Armenian, as I mentioned, I grew up in Los Angeles, but my grandparents still live to this day in Armenia, in a small village known as Gugork, just on the outskirts of Vanadzor. And I think a memory that I won't ever forget is how every year when I would go back to visit Armenia, it would never feel as though there was this strong disconnect between us. I never felt like I missed out on all these memories with my grandparents, and that I never got to have that great, it's not granddaughter and grandparent relationship that I had always dreamed of, that I'd always seen in movies, that I always wished. But every time I would go back, and specifically my grandmother, she would always just have her hands open for me and greet me, and it would feel just as if my life in the US had paused during that entire time, and it had just continued from the moment I'd seen her, because there was not a moment of disconnect, not a moment of awkwardness, or that sort of period of time where you're getting comfortable with someone that you know but you don't live with, but you speak too rarely. It just sort of felt like everything just continued right from the moment that we had left off the last year that I was in Armenia. And she'd always greet me with open arms. And my grandma had, gosh, I can't even tell you, anywhere close to 14, 15 grandchildren, but I truly never felt like I was left out. And every time I would go back, she makes me like hot chocolate, but with the milk that she would get from the cows fresh every morning for me. And that's that like taste of the milk and the hot chocolate, and her hospitality and the warmth that she showed me every time when I would go back home, treating me like none other, treating me just as equal as her other grandchildren, was, and to this day is something that is so close to my heart. Because I think sometimes when I visit Armenia, I can feel that a little bit of that disconnect with the people, or not growing up there, or even my cousins who all are about the same age and all grew up together and have this different level of bond and connection that, you know, I wish to have and I dream to have. And I never felt left out from my grandma any minute. And every time she sees me or calls me, or I go to Armenia, her eyes just always fill up in tears. And I think that just goes to show that you're never disconnected from where you come from, and keeping those relationships with people, especially your grandparents that are so close to you, intact, in a way can sort of help bridge that connection between a diaspora Armenian to their homeland. Because I definitely think that my grandma was, and to this day is, that bridge for me in Armenia. Speaking of cultural bridges from the diaspora to Armenia, I think cultural preservation is a very important conversation to have. And it's so important because forgetting is sort of like the final death. Because our ancestors of the Hamidian massacres, or the Baku pogroms, or the genocide, they didn't survive to be erased. I think cultural preservation is not just an acknowledgement of your people and our dances and our music. Cultural preservation is an active act of resistance, especially for a people who've had to fight so hard to exist. I think it's so important that we don't just undermine how important it is to preserve our culture, our people, our identity, and where we come from. And also, in a way, it's sort of an act of love. It's an act of love to the people who fought so dearly for us to exist today, for the sort of millions of people that didn't have the opportunities that I have today, for the youth in the 2020 Artsakh War that didn't have the same opportunity that I have today. I think it's important that we preserve their memory and that we preserve our culture, because we owe it to them in every way possible. I think every recipe we pass down, every family story that we retell, and every new word that we learn in Armenian, it's sort of like how I like to imagine it is like stitching a quilt sort of big enough for future generations, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, to find warmth and belonging in. Because it's so important to recognize that although I am first generation here in the US, my children won't be, and my children's children won't be. And as sad as it is, I think the more that generations pass in the US, the more disconnected that the Armenian people are going to feel from their homeland. And preserving that culture in any shape or form is so important to keep their identities intact. And to make sure that they know the people that came before them, and to know that the history and the culture that came before them. I guess I would just like to wrap this up by saying it's so important for us to never forget Armenia in everything that we do, in our lives, in every moment and every day. And one of my favorite quotes that I often like to recall upon is a quote by Andranik Ozanyan. He was a general, an Armenian military commander and statesman, and he basically puts it out pretty simply. I don't remember his exact words, but I can give a paraphrase of it. It was, when the day ends and you finally put your head to the pillow, think about what you have done for Armenia that day. It's so simple, but it's so powerful, because Armenia isn't just something we remember on April 24. It's not something that we remember when we're introducing ourselves. I think being Armenian is a daily, active commitment and responsibility, and I emphasize active because it can't be passive, because it's through being a passive Armenian that we lose our history. It's through being a passive Armenian that we lose our culture. I think every day, each and every one of us needs to be working to make sure that Armenia is a home that our future kids and our grandchildren can go back to, so that, when they ask us in the future, when a hypothetical future, if Armenia doesn't exist today, what were you doing back then? How were you involved? What was going on? What were you doing? That we don't sit there in silence. Once again, I want to thank the Armenian Women's Welfare Association for allowing me this opportunity to speak a little bit about my Armenian heritage. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. We hope today's episode offered insight into the Armenian experience. To explore more resources or make a donation to help further our mission, please visit www.awwainc.org. That's www.awwainc.org. Your support makes a lasting difference.